Howdy, y'all. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Some Antics, a stream about building great user experiences for the web with a focus on accessibility and core web technologies. I'm your host, Ben Myers, and today we are rejoined by the OG guest, Anthony Canthony, web developer himself. Welcome back to the stream, Anthony.
All right, that's the first time I think I've heard you say Anthony Canthony out loud. Only seen you type it so far.
I mean, what else could AJC stand for, honestly?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's the only thing.
It's the only thing. I call you the OG because you were the first ever semantics guest. You joined the stream and we talked a lot about Redwood and accessibility and documentation and stuff like that. But you've been on a couple more times, and every time you've kind of pushed the envelope of what I would consider a semantic stream. Thanks to you, we've done streams on Vite and on Dino and stuff like that. Things I wouldn't usually consider within the semantics purview.
And what's funny is I
Yeah.
remember when I was pitching those topics to you, I was like, these things are probably going to be a big deal, like more so than they are right now. And I think like both Vite and Dino, that is like proven to be true.
Yes, absolutely. So I put a link to a couple of your past streams in the chat. I might have. Oh, I did miss one. Actually, hang on. It was accessible routing. There we go. So this is, I believe, number 5 for you. But yeah. So
Right.
today, we are talking about something in which I will freely admit I'm very outside of my element here. Which is the decentralized web, right? The distributed web, and specifically interplanetary file system. So, I guess let's kind of talk about that. Like, what do those concepts mean to you, and why should web developers find those interesting?
Yeah, I think first teasing apart the difference between what does it mean for something to be distributed versus decentralized is a good thing, because when I was first getting into this kind of stuff, I would, read all these ideas and hear these words. And actually first got into this stuff before I really like knew how to code at all. Like I've been very interested in kind of like the quote unquote Web3. Like I actually wrote like a blog post about Web3 back in 2018. So a lot of people don't really realize the term Web3 is not actually super new. It's been around for at least 5 years, if not longer. But the idea is that we want to have systems that are kind of across multiple computers in multiple geographic regions. And that can be something that is distributed because it's literally a bunch of computers talking to each other and they're distributed across the world. Now, for something to be decentralized, though, means that they're not all being connected to a single point of control. So you can have a distributed system that has kind of like a single central actor that is kind of keeping it all together and telling them all what to do and keeping the data stored somewhere and all that. Or you can have a system where there's a protocol that involves multiple computers talking to each other, and there is no kind of central actor that's in control of the system. So that's what makes something
Okay.
decentralized.
So
So if you think about it,
an
go ahead.
example of like the distributed system here, right, could be a content delivery network or CDN, right? Because those are, they're global, right? They're distributed. You can get them from a bunch of different, like you can get your resources, your assets from a bunch of different nodes on the CDN. However, the CDN is usually, I mean, owned and maintained and operated by a single corporation, right? And so, they have the ultimate say as to what happens with your content, and they could just like remove it. So it's distributed, but we would not call it decentralized.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is why you'll hear people constantly argue about this in the Web3 space about how decentralized is something. Is it actually decentralized? And should you use a centralized service for Web3, or does that kind of defeat the whole purpose? Because I work for a company called QuickNode, and QuickNode is a blockchain infrastructure company. And for that, some people will be like, well, why would you use a blockchain infrastructure company if the whole point is to have this like decentralized kind of system? And the answer to that is like, well, do you know how to run a Linux server? maybe not. And if you want to kind of interact with this technology, there's ways where you can leverage centralized services while still keeping the benefits of decentralization, because most of these services, all they're really doing is they're just giving you access to this system in a way where if you wanted to move off of them and actually run your own server, you can do that because they're not doing anything necessarily proprietary. they're just making a really, really nice, simple onboarding experience into actually interacting with this stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, and then I guess so. How does the interplanetary file system fit into all of this?
Yeah, and this is why I felt that this would be a good topic to pitch to you. And we've talked about how I try to push you out of your bounds a little bit, because this isn't a cryptocurrency. It's not even a blockchain, really, what we're looking at here. It's something else entirely. And I found that it actually can be kind of easy to describe to people depending on their experience. If you've ever used torrents in the past, what's your torrenting experience like, Ben?
Limited, but non-zero.
Okay, cool. Yeah, great. So a torrent is a system where you have, say, a bunch of people have a movie on their computer that they want to share with others. And the movie company does not want them to do that, though. So if they were to put that movie on a centralized server somewhere, then the company that owns the rights to that movie can say, hey, I own this movie. You don't. You guys shut this computer down. But if that movie is broken apart and distributed across 10 different systems, they can't send cease and desist letters to all 10 of those, have them all shut down, especially if one of those computers happens to be in Russia, say. So the Pirate Bay and torrents and things like that is an original peer-to-peer decentralized system that predates all of this stuff. But what if we wanted to use that kind of tech for something, I don't want to say like more useful, but something a little more practical, let's say.
Something
And
that
we
doesn't necessarily skirt the bounds of the law.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a programmer, Juan Benet, who built IPFS, and there's now a company called Protocol Labs that's heavily based on Bell Labs that is kind of supporting the work behind this. And he wanted to create a distributed peer-to-peer system, kind of like torrents, but instead of for movies, for Git. So like a distributed version control system. And then that would allow people to have content now be also decentralized in a way where the content couldn't be taken down. The content could be easily accessible from multiple different places. So that's kind of the origin of like what is IPFS.
Okay, so we're talking about like I guess the fusion here, right, is like GitHub meets BitTorrent, right? Is like, because GitHub being a centralized place to store your Git repos, right? Like that, it puts a pretty UI on it, but that's the real utility, is that like it's a centralized place to host your repos, right? But this is saying like, no, we'll actually have like it spread out across all the different nodes on the network, all the computers that are participating. Um, and yeah, so it's not like, GitHub owns the code, right? GitHub is the sole arbiter of what happens to the code.
And this is kind of funny actually, because GitHub is a centralized version of Git,
Hmm.
but Git itself was already kind of like a decentralized,
Yeah.
distributed kind of thing, because you would have multiple people with these Git repos on their computer. So if anyone ever was on their computer and they just like lost everything, there's
Hmm.
probably 5 other people with that same Git history, and so they can get the repo again. Now, this is taking the idea to its logical extreme, which is not only do we distribute it across multiple computers, we distribute it across multiple computers that are actually connected to a computer network. That's the really big difference between, like, some
Hmm.
people are like, well, Git was already decentralized. I was like, well, yeah, it was decentralized across a bunch of computers that only individual people had access to. So what if we
Right.
distributed it across a bunch of computers and then took those computers and hooked them up to DNS or hooked them up to some sort of protocol that would allow people to then view these through the internet?
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. I'm sure I will have more questions as time goes on, but let me go ahead and start sharing my screen, and let me actually go where's my browser? There's my browser. Hello. All right. So y'all, today we're talking with Anthony. Go follow Anthony on Twitter. Today we're talking IBFS. We've gone through we went through ahead of time and installed IPFS both for the command line and for the like in their GUI app that they've got. Anthony's put the links to those in the chat. And I'm also gonna send a link to, you've got a first look at IPFS article that was super helpful for like
Yeah, and I
getting
should
started as
mention,
well.
this was probably the longest time I've ever spent writing a blog article was writing this one, because when I first started doing this, like I had no idea what any of this stuff was or how any of this
Mhm.
stuff works. And it was like really, really confusing to have to figure out. And the docs are actually, they have good docs, and the whole system is like set up to be fairly ergonomical in terms of like dev experience type stuff, but just
Mhm.
like the mental model of like what was even going on when I was doing it was like so weird. But it was literally, it was the first time since I've gotten into web development where I felt like I was doing something genuinely new, like
Okay.
genuinely like I was doing something I'd never done before. And it was like really, really mind bending. And that took me like a long time to kind of put into a sequence that I felt like made sense and that like other people could kind of follow. And then it ends up being so long that I then like had a whole bunch of content for like a whole second article at. So there'll be a kind of follow up to this at some point where we get
Gotcha.
into the entire set of IPFS services that go along with this. So we're not going to get into like, we probably won't get into things like pinning services or like kind of hosting services for this, because we're just going to show everything you can kind of do from your own computer. But yeah, like as you
Gotcha.
see, as you're kind of scrolling, we're eventually going to get to like creating HTML files and stuff like that.
Yeah. So one question I actually have before we get into this I guess the question is, um, are there sites that you feel like you would not be able to deploy to IPFS? And similarly, are there sites that IPFS enables that you wouldn't be able to create without that architecture? Like, do our
Mhm.
sites look any differently because they're on IPFS? Because one thing I can imagine is like, probably managing your like environment secrets, your environment details is something that's probably a bit of a different story because you don't really want to be sending your secrets out to a bunch of different computers.
Yeah, right. And there are ways to manage permissions and controls and API keys and all that kind of stuff, because even though it is a distributed network, you have a node that is a member of that network, and you can
Okay.
choose to do with that node what you want. So that node can hide things from the rest of the network if you want, or that node can just expose things to the whole network if you want. So this isn't saying that everything needs to be public and that you're just like putting this all to this giant network. You have like no control of what you're putting onto that network. Like, that's not the case at all. But it's set up in a way where if you want to have things be available on all of the nodes so that you know it's like kind of backed up and it's safe and all that, then you can do that. In terms of the question of like, what is this for? What is it not for? It is right now being aimed at being literally as it says on the till. How we said IPFS stands for Interplanetary File System. So it's a file system. It's a place to put your files. That's really how you should think about it. And that can be music, movies, anything like that. For us, we're going to be focusing on how do you put HTML files onto it, because once you have an HTML file onto it, then you can just think about it like it's a web server and you're exposing that to the internet. So
Mhm.
anything that you can do in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you'll be able to do in this. I would say for today, right now, I would absolutely not put important mission critical applications that like customers will be using, because the network itself is still figuring out exactly how to be always reliable and up and stuff like that. So like the network, it doesn't really go down, but what happens is you have these gateways that give you access to the network. And there's lots of different gateways that are being run by different companies. Like even Cloudflare has a gateway, and there's various levels of quality and uptime that go along with all of these gateways. So, this is something where I have always been interested in like kind of new up and coming tech.
Mhm.
And it's like I'll play around with it, I'll show it to people. And like as I've done this more and more, I've become like more and more conscious, like always saying this is like a newer thing. This is not something that you should like completely rely on. Like it's like super established tech. IPFS is 5 years beyond anything else I've ever talked about. So I'm talking about these things being like new and cutting edge and not production ready. This thing is the farthest from being production ready of anything I've ever promoted. So like let me be very clear about that. This is cool, fun tech you should play around with and you should learn about, because it's going to expand your mind and give you a taste of like
Mhm.
what's to come. But this is not something you should really build a company on unless you feel comfortable becoming an expert on this.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Because yeah, you'll be paying the cost of, the APIs changing, or the approaches, the protocols changing, and even just paying the cost of not yet having best practices, right? Like
Mhm.
when you're the tip of the arrow, you're gonna or tip of the spear, I think is the saying, right? Like you're
Mhm.
gonna encounter all of the pain points, and you're not necessarily gonna overcome them the best possible way because no one knows how quite yet.
Yeah.
That's
And
yeah,
that
very
was
where
and
this.
the one killer feature that I would say today, right now, if you're thinking about this, and that is appropriate to use, and what does make it different from anything else is the idea of permanence. Because think about just the problem of link rot. Like link rot is
Yeah.
such a huge problem on the internet because people will put up these websites and then maybe they'll change their URL, or they'll like go to a different hosting service. So they've even changed their domain entirely. And
Mhm.
then you have all these links that are out in the world that no longer work, but the content may still be there. It's just somewhere else. Or you may have something where there was some content that was really, really important that you wanted to save, but then someone changed it. And so the link is the same, but the content's different. Like all of that stuff makes it almost impossible to use the internet as a historical source unless you're doing something like the Internet Archive, where they're constantly taking snapshots and uploading them. So I would be very, very surprised if the Internet Archive does not at some point move to some kind of tech like this, because I think it really
Okay.
makes a lot of sense in a
But
lot of ways.
But on the other token, that permanence seems like it could be something that's ripe for abuse because, I could
Mm-hmm.
put like doxing details out there, right? And it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot harder to have that wiped, I guess.
Yeah, that's the bit one of the biggest concerns with this tech for sure. And it's going to be, I think, up to the gateways to kind of manage that, because if something is on the network, if something's on IPFS, but the internet gateway wants to block it, then they can do that, because the gateways still have control over like the traffic that's going in and out and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to kind of like set this up in a way where it's a little more friendly to stuff like that, you're going to want to like kind of stick with things like Cloudflare and stuff like that, because then you're still going to be going through these more like centralized services. And this is a problem that it's like the problem of freedom like itself, problem of freedom means that people are free to do bad things sometimes. So that's a real concern, and it's one that I need to kind of learn more about, and how that's going to be mitigated by
Yeah.
systems like this. I think for us, like, I just want to show it to like web developers who are like interested in this kind of stuff. And I would say that if you're kind of worried about like having your content like docs and stuff like that, like people like my general advice is that like be wary of what you put on the internet,
Mhm.
and if you're always careful about what you put on the internet, then you'll be less likely to be doxxed. But otherwise, it's like you got to find people you can trust that you share stuff with on the internet. And this is a huge societal wide problem that we're all going to have to kind of come to terms with at a certain point. And unfortunately, I don't
Yeah.
have a ton of great answers for.
Yeah, and I think the caveat I've got is that like even if you do like limit who you're trusting people with information on, right? Like, you can still you could be the subject of a cyber attack, or you could
Mhm,
be like the subject of a revenge porn attack or something like that. Like
mhm.
someone who was unauthorized, or someone you once upon a time trusted, can like still put content out on the web that like you yeah, like you should not be held responsible for that kind of stuff, I feel. And it like anytime you talk about like permanence as like enshrining a thing on like a blockchain, or a distributed network or something like that, right? Like these are things that you have to deal with as like, even when people are being their best, right, and not doing anything you could fault them for, like there are still going to be malicious actors who like will take advantage of systems like that to abuse them and do terrible things, right? And I'm of the mindset that like an infrastructure and architecture like this absolutely needs ways to deal with that.
Mhm. Yeah, I would guess that we'll probably find ourselves in a situation where there will be kind of like more moderated networks on
Mhm.
IPFS, where there'll be nodes that will get together and will kind of collectively decide on like what's appropriate content and what's not. And then they'll kind of like police that. And then people who want to just do whatever they want will go on to like the
Mhm.
more kind of Wild West networks. So I had to like kind of put my prediction hat on. That would be what I predict where I think this is going to go. but it's hard to say at this point.
What that does sound like to me is the solution is centralization, which is
Well, the
maybe
solution
the
would be it wouldn't be centralization though, because it would require a group of people to collectively decide those moderation rules. That would be the difference.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
which I think
oh,
is
oh,
actually
yeah.
that could be a cool thing. I think because not everyone will agree with what needs to be moderated and what doesn't.
Sure. All right.
Yeah.
I want to get
And
into
these are
like
the type of
actually
cool, fun
right.
problems that come up when you start talking Web3 stuff. It's like you get these huge philosophical
Oh
debates
yeah,
like very,
yeah, yeah.
very quickly.
Absolutely. But I want to actually look in and do some, like writing some code, getting some stuff
Mhm.
deployed. So
Yeah.
how should we get started?
Yeah. So the first thing is let's go to our command line. And since you already have the CLI, let's just do the IPFS dash dash version. Cool. So we're on 0.13.1. So we were already past my blog post, which was written on 0.12.0. And this is a repository that now is on your computer. Because as I was saying, this is just Git, you have a Git repo. And so type IPFS init. You may have already done this, but just if
I
anyone's
have not.
following along, this is the first step they need to do. So this is going to initialize their repository. And you also see there you have a peer identity. So the peer identity is when you actually connect to the network, then you're going to be able to kind of find someone else on the network through
Okay.
their peer identity.
Gotcha. So what just got logged here, this is not sensitive in any way, right? I don't need to
Correct.
have blurred this out or anything like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It actually seems like my config file already exists. Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, and then you also see how it says reinitializing would overwrite your keys. So this is why I say this is a locked down system. This is something with keys that only you have access to now right now on your
Mhm.
computer. So those keys are important, and like they have set the system in a way where they're on your computer somewhere, and I'm sure you can find them if you want to. Like I wouldn't even really know where to go to find them. So there's a kind of more education that I think needs to happen around like what is actually public and private here and what is locked down and what's not. And for right now, we're just kind of going to be doing like simple little HTML exercises. So it's not going to be like a huge deal, but like there's larger questions like how is this system actually secured that are worth going into if that's something you find interesting.
Gotcha. All right.
Okay, so now when you first initialized it, you can't see it here. It will usually give you the ability to kind of log the first. Let me drop this in the chat. So when you initialize, the first thing they do is they say, hey, run this command here. And what's going on in this,
What?
yeah, right. And what's going on here is there's a content hash. So content hash is the first thing you really got to understand about how does IPFS work, because well, first off, what's a hash, Ben?
Right. Yeah. So, um, whenever you, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. Basically, it's a way to verify that some content is what you say it is by basically performing a lot of transformations on the content. And those transformations are lossy. You can't reverse engineer them. But the same, like at the end of that process, you get a seemingly more or less random string that, like, if you had made even one tiny change to the content that you had hashed, you would have had a wildly different string at the end. So it becomes fairly straightforward to just compare some very small, lightweight strings, and trust that it's like good enough. Now, multiple things can usually resolve to the same hash, but those things are usually so disparate, different enough that, like, you wouldn't be, like, you wouldn't expect, like, anyone to get those things confused, right? So if you end up with a hash and it's the same hash as what you told me to expect, then, like, I know that, roughly speaking, this stuff hasn't been tampered with or changed in any way. I think you've got on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was drinking some water. Yeah, that was all correct and all good. And the important bit little that in there was when you do the hash, the thing that the hash spits out is like globally unique. Like it will not ever be created again. And so this is what makes it useful for this permanence idea is that once you create a hash from your content, like that is something that will stay the same forever. And if you change the content, then you get a new hash. And this is something that will be like, once you get kind of further down the line of using this stuff, like, well, wait, how do I update my website then? And so what you can do is you can have that hash point to another hash, and then that hash can stay the same while you update the content. So that's something that we may get to, may not. We'll kind of see how far we get in this.
Yeah.
But let's actually real quick, because I always forget at what point of the process this actually becomes important or not. So let's just open up another terminal and get this going for now. We're going to start the IPFS daemon.
Okay, I think that's already been started thanks to me opening up IPFS desktop earlier. Okay, well, it says it's initializing. Okay, cool.
Let's see.
Are we expecting more? Oh, there it is. There it all is.
Yeah, so now this is us actually connecting to the network. And yeah, I'm not sure if IPFS desktop does this automatically, but this is a good thing to do regardless. And you see all these, we have IP4, IP6, TCP, UDP, you see all that stuff. This is where we're actually like connecting to the internet now. And then our kind of IPFS node now is going to be able to take the content that we're creating, we're putting on our own node, and expose that to the overall network. So hopefully things will work and people can actually view these websites. We'll see if that actually happens or not. But let's go back to our other terminal now.
All right.
Yeah. And then could you just grab that thing I dropped in the chat and run that command? Because usually it pops up the first time you init. So
okay. Yeah. And is that okay, cool.
Yeah. And so that runs the cat command, which basically just like reads the file out to the terminal. And this is pretty cool. This is I like this little like hello world experience here. They're saying you're seeing this, you are now interfacing with the IPFS and Merkle DAG, which is a distributed acyclic graph that is using Merkle trees. So that's all crypto stuff. You don't gotta worry about too much, but it's showing you that you have a couple different files here. And if you noticed, when we did that cat command, you have the long content hash, then you have the README after. So what's happening here is directories have content hashes and files have content hashes. So if you use the directory content hash, then you can view other things inside that directory. So do that exact same command, but change to, let's do security notes. Let's see what this one says. Yeah, there you go. So we try hard to ensure your system is safe and robust. So they're like, this is alpha software, letting you know that it's a networked program. You always got to worry about things like that. And then they also say, hey, we have a security team here. So if you ever like need help, contact us. And then it's not necessarily proven secure yet, which basically just means there are always going to be security vulnerabilities that may exist depending on what kind of encryption you're using. But these are people who are like academic researchers. So if you want to put your trust in like anybody, is like you, as the buck's got to stop somewhere. And so like these are people who actually know how cryptography works, know how encryption works. So this is a relatively, I think, somewhat safe system at this point, as like crazy new alpha software kind of goes. But just like disclaimer, as we've been kind of giving disclaimers as you can go through this whole thing, this is something new. This is something that you should not like really put super duper important sensitive stuff on.
Absolutely. It's definitely a use at your own risk disclaimer.
Yeah. Cool. And then do that same thing again, but go to the about page.
Got it. Okay. Oh, look at that. Then, it's got a whole thing.
Yeah, and this is a lot of the stuff that I talk about this in my blog post. I think IPFS as a web is a really important one, which is that can be used to view documents like the web, and that they can then be accessed through HTTP. So let me try that real quick. So if we take the thing that I posted in the chat and you go to https /
Where are we going?
So sorry, so I'm trying to do a couple things at once right now. Okay, go back to the terminal you just had up real quick. And then scroll up a little bit to where it says a web. Yeah, so take where it says HTTP IPFS IO and then path. Yeah, so grab that and then paste that in, and then paste everything from IPFS /on from the Twitch command. So
Okay.
basically it'll have /IPFS / the content hash.
All right. So this whole thing.
Yeah. Let's see if that works.
Okay. Yeah, it's the same file.
Great. So anyone else should be able to go view this as well. And this is where all the important stuff kind of starts coming together, because this is where this becomes an actual website on the internet other people can look at. So how is this possible? This is possible because of IPFS.io. That is the gateway that I was referring to earlier. So that is one that IPFS, the protocol labs themselves, they are running that. They are managing that gateway. They are ensuring that that gateway stays up and stays reliable and available. There's also other ones like Cloudflare. So Cloudflare has an IPFS gateway. Let me grab a link from that. So that's going to be basically the same thing, but instead of IPFS.io, it's going to start with Cloudflare-IPFS.com.
Cloudflare-IPFS.com, and then it's still /IPFS/QMQ, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is the point where things start to really click together for me, because I was like, oh, okay, so the content hash is something that always stays the same. And so you can reliably expect it to always stay the same. And then you have these gateways, which are different ways to access it. But the gateways are just giving you access to the content hashes. So the gateways can change, and you have different gateways, but the content will always stay the same. And then the content can, once you figure out where the gateways are, then as the content's changing, you keep the same gateway, you change the content, and then you see all the different stuff on there. So like, oh, wow, this is actually like really, really cool.
Absolutely. Okay. Cool.
All right. So let's now start making our own stuff.
Yes.
Now we all see all that. What we should do next is create a directory with some stuff in it.
All right. I'm just going to call this Some Antics IPFS.
Yeah.
All right. We'll go in there. All right.
Yeah, and you can just create an index.html file and then put your standard kind of HTML boilerplate, and you can say whatever you want in there. Just say hello, put some links or anything like that.
Right.
Be curious, when you first start like a completely skeleton HTML page, are there any specific things you do to ensure that it's accessible, or do you just try and stick to
I use weird VS Code profile seems to have opened up for me. That's unusual.
You want to check that out real quick?
Fine. I'm missing my snippet that I've usually got for this. Does this have any of like my extensions or anything? You know, I just restarted my computer. I wonder if VS Code did an update or something like that. Interesting. Oh my god, my cat is trying to like barge in.
Is there somewhere online where you got that snippet from?
It was the like Emmett exclamation mark. You know what I'm gonna do? I think that the reason this is weird is I haven't actually opened up a directory. So let me try this once more. I'm gonna open up this current directory. Then I think we'll be good. Yeah.
Right, I think VS Code where we would have issues.
Yeah, no. So far, all the IPFS stuff is working great. It's VS Code that's the problem today. But yes, I use like there's a fairly standard like exclamation mark. Here we go. There's looking more like it.
Yeah, I saw it all the time, like in Brad Travers's videos, and this when I was first learning, they would always always do that.
Yeah. All this index.html. We will update later and not update on stream. Updating things on a stream is a bad idea. Okay. This should hopefully do it. Okay. Well, I don't know. I don't know why that isn't going, but that's fine. X. All right. But yeah, so you're gonna have
Yeah, I
your
think
HTML tag. This I think needs a we need doc type HTML up here.
so. Nocturne is asking what are some of our favorite VS Code extensions. I try and keep mine pretty light for the most part. The biggest one for me that I think everyone should use and install automatically is import cost. What import cost does is it shows you the exact number of kilobytes of all of your dependencies whenever you're adding them to one of your projects. And if you're someone who does a lot of JavaScripty stuff, you'll quickly realize why everyone's been telling you not to worry about how much JavaScript you're putting into your projects.
All right. Yeah. Here we are. We got our snippet going. So yeah, the main things, it's got the you need your HTML element needs a lang attribute. We've got UTF-8 encoding. We've got the viewport like width set to the device width. This is so people can zoom in without things getting weird. And then I like to add a main tag. I'll say hello world. And then just for the sake of expediency, I'll just drop in some lorem ipsum there. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So this is a boring page, but yeah, Nocturne, I will have to look through my extensions. Let me just like pop this open. Mainly I have a whole lot of like themes and stuff like that. I have a browser sync one that lets me like run any web page like as a web server, like host it via a local web server just through the VS Code interface. That stuff's good. Um, yeah, quickly going through. Most of these are themes. Um, I also just love anything that provides reusable snippets out of the box. Okay, so we've got us some content. It's it's not pretty. Oh, you know what? I actually have. There we go. We're pulling in.
Oh, you should give us a meta description as well.
Oh, do we want to use a meta description? We totally can. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? It's like meta. There we go. Um, this was deployed IPFS on stream on a semantic stream. There we go. Cool. So yeah, we've got that now. We could add a whole lot more, but for the sake of expediency, I think this is what we'll probably be good with for now.
Great. Okay. Now that we have our website, let's go back into our terminal.
All right.
And the one where you're actually in the project, go one level back out so you're no longer inside of it. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to do IPFS add. And so this is the command that's going to actually put this onto your node. And before that, you're going to do a -r flag.
Okay. Is
And what
this
this is going to do,
recursive? So it adds the whole directory structure?
God, you're so smart, Ben.
All
That's
right.
exactly what it is. I would
Is
like when I first saw it, I was like, why is it recursive? What does that mean?
so yeah, if we had folders within folders within folders, like all of those would get added rather than like the top level.
Yeah. Yeah. So that should be it. So go ahead and run that command. And
Okay.
if all went according to plan, we will now have 2 content hashes here. So can
Yes.
you drop both of those into the chat?
Yeah. I'm just going to. It's not gonna be pretty, but I will just highlight this whole thing.
Okay,
All right.
so let me start messing around with these a little bit. So do the, let's see, which one should we do first? Do the cat command that we were doing before. So just go up through your old
Yes.
yeah, go up. Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah, take that one. And then yeah, grab that whole thing with the index.html at the end.
Okay, so
So actually,
this.
it'll be the bottom one actually, because you want to do the directory hash.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we'll try both of these, and then people can see.
So I
Yeah.
nuke this whole hash, right? Because this
Yep.
this is not my project. There we go. And then it's going to be index.html.
Yep. And that should just show you the
No, do I
content.
need semantics IPFS?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, cool. Here we are. So it's
And then
the
now,
contents of our HTML file.
yeah, and then now do that command again, but with just the content hash of index.html. And without
That
anything
was
after the
this
content
one
hash.
up here?
Yeah.
Okay. Type this out. Okay. Got it. And that's my HTML file again.
Yeah. And then now let's try doing that with the IPFS gateway and see what comes up.
And by that, you mean going back into our browser? And
yeah.
Okay, so we take, this is the hash for just the HTML file.
And this is the point where something is almost certain to go wrong, because a lot of times I'll do this and then for some reason the content just doesn't show up. I think that might be because it takes a while for it to propagate.
This is also the Cloudflare gateway. So if you'd like, I can go to like ipfs.io instead if you'd like.
Let's start with that one and see what happens.
Okay, well, it's thinking. Do I need to do the directory one instead? Would that be better?
I'm trying both of them right now and seeing what happens. Let's hold off on this for a second. Let's pin it, and then that might help out. So pinning is an important part. So when you talk about IPFS being permanent, and like when you put something on there, it's on there forever, there's a massive asterisk next to that claim, which is that if you don't pin the content, then your content regularly gets garbage collected off of the network. And this, it does make sense, because if you think about like, if every time everyone put anything on the network, it stays there forever, the network's gonna just explode in size in like no time. So it's set up in a way where you can put something on your node and then it'll be on the network, but it's not really there permanently yet. To actually make it permanent, you have to pin it. And the pinning part is, there's stuff I can get kind of complicated about. There's actually entire services now based around handling how you pin your IPFS content.
Okay.
But for now, let's grab the hash, grab the first hash that your terminal spit out for you.
That's this one, okay. So I've got that.
And then do IPFS pin add, and then that.
Okay, IPFS pin add, and then our hash, like that.
Yeah, just like that.
Okay.
Great. And now do IPFS pin ls.
Is that -ls?
No, just ls.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So that's the stuff that we have pinned right now. So if you see the very last one, it has you pinned recursively. So let's go into now let's go into our IPFS desktop application.
You got it. We've installed that ahead of time. Oh, that's just the installer. Okay. Let me just use the Spotlight search. It's thinking. Is it secretly behind here? Is this your card?
Yes. All right, cool. So this is so you see we're connected, and you can kind of see bandwidth and metrics and stuff like that. And go to files on the left.
A fun fact, clicking files doesn't necessarily take you to files immediately. Okay.
Yeah, I imagine it's just lagging because of the stream. All right, so this right now, we don't see anything. So click import on the top right.
Okay.
And let's do it from IPFS. And then do the path for the content. So it'll be just /IPFS/that.
Okay. IPFS. Okay, like this.
Yep. And then just like that, yeah.
Should we name it or nah?
Sure. Yeah. All right,
Okay.
cool. And then click it. And you see how it has pinned status next to it. So that shows that it's been pinned.
Yeah, so if I go back here, okay, it is
Yep.
pinned.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep. And then go to more. And then let's go share a link. Let's see what happens with that.
Copy
And
that.
copy that.
Put it in the Twitch chat as well for folks at home. And then let's go open this. Oh, hello. All right. Yeah, so opening this up. Nice. Okay. Yeah, we do have our file.
We're there.
Yeah.
We're on the network.
We deployed. We can go ahead and end the stream here, you know?
Hey, this is what I was hoping we would actually get to this point.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, so this is kind of where I was hoping we would get to. So that's awesome. All right,
And
cool.
to confirm, like, you know, if you open up that link on your end, like you're seeing this as well. So
Hopefully.
like we are officially deployed and pinned. Our site is gonna live here more or less forever, right?
That's the idea.
Okay.
Let's see if it actually come up on my computer. This is where stuff always gets a little wonky, and why I would usually recommend, if you actually want to put a website up on IPFS, you should take a look at something like Fleek. Actually, we have 15 minutes. I wonder if we can get this up on Fleek.
Is that what you want to do?
Let's do it. Yeah, create a Fleek account really fast. Should be Fleek dot. Hold on.
Fleek? Am I hearing that right?
Fleek. Yeah, fleek.co. That's the one.
Okay.
So what this is, Fleek is, because, you know, why wouldn't we have this? It's a Jamstack hosting provider for IPFS.
All right.
And by the way, I was able to get to the site, and I'm not seeing it on my. I am seeing it on my computer.
Should I go with Git provider or email? I don't have it here.
Do Git provider, yeah.
Cool. It allows GitHub. Awesome.
Yeah, and you should get get your index.html up on your Some Antics GitHub, or whichever GitHub you're going to connect here.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. So let's see. Oh wow, there we go. Okay. Yeah, git init, git commit, add everything, add a message, index HTML. Oh really? Okay. Hit add. There we go. There we go. We'll create GitHub repo. Antics, dev, IPFS, public, yes. Push it up. And if anyone wants to see our incredibly thorough repo, it's there. Okay, cool. Yeah, so now, oh, okay. Oh, did it get me all signed in? I don't think I ever, okay. Yeah, I don't think I ever actually finished clicking okay, so.
Wild. Click add new site.
Add new site. Connect with GitHub. Okay, it's gonna make me actually do this. All right. And I want this in. Yeah,
this will probably let you give access to just the individual repo, which is always good. So only select repositories.
Yeah, we're just going to select
minimum permissions always.
Yep. That. All right. Oh boy. Let me real quickly go into privacy mode.
And then if people have questions in the chat, now would be a good time to start dropping those. Hey, works on mobile. Nice.
Yep. I have to open up another browser so I can get my LastPass instance up. I think, yeah, we are in privacy mode. Awesome. Okay, so in the meantime, what is Fleek? Like, you said this is a Jamstack provider for IPFS?
Yeah, so as I was saying, there's going to be a lot of higher level concerns when it comes to using this, which is like making sure that's actually pinned. and then making sure that when you try and update your website that you don't have to also update the content hash every single time. So there's ways to do this with IPNS, the Interplanetary Name System, which is like a DNS for this. Because if you think about like we're essentially like trying to rebuild the entire internet with this thing, so you can't use necessarily DNS. You can what you can do though is you can create your own name on IPFS, and then that will point to a content hash, and then you have a DNS record, a DNS text record that points to your IPNS name, which points to the content hash. So there's ways to do it so a regular old HTTPS request can find that content hash, but there's a lot of steps in that chain. There's a lot of knowledge about DNS, the architecture of the internet. And this is stuff I was saying, like this thing just like blew my mind when I was using it. Actually, I had to think about DNS for the first time ever, and had to figure out that DNS can actually just point arbitrarily to anything you want. And so you can just point it to like this other thing, and then it'll just kind of go down the chain. And that is what is going to be stuff that you don't really want to have to do yourself, and it would be nice to just offload to a service. And then also, we want a service that's also going to let us stick it to a Git repo, and every time we make a change, you get to push the change, because that's what we expect now, and anything less will be beneath us.
Gotcha.
Because Netlify has spoiled us all. Netlify of ourselves.
It really has
raised the standard of what we expect a system to do for us.
Okay. Let me get the actual correct password in there, and then let me get gonna be off with GitHub Mobile. Oh no, it isn't. Okay, cool. We're good. In that case, let me turn off privacy mode. Let me confirm our friends at home can now see what we're seeing, which is a big authorize button.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. With that, finally, we'll choose that one. And then should I go ahead and choose IPFS?
Yeah.
Cool. I'll end this a bit. All right, and then so I could choose what branch to deploy off of. I currently only have the main branch.
Yep.
And then anything else?
This is hot new framework, HTML.
It's so underground. No one's working with it yet.
Yeah, I think you can just hit deploy site. I think that's all you got to do.
Cool.
Hopefully it should know what to
All right.
do.
This is really just the Netlify of IPFS.
It really is, right? And this is why I'm trying to like talk to people at Netlify and be like, hey, you could build this. People would think it's cool, and you'd be the leader in the system immediately. But yeah, so it's right now a lot of the older Jamstack providers are not doing anything with IPFS. It's kind of these like new upstarts are creating kind of like imitations of them for IPFS. Cloudflare is really the first kind of like big pre-Web3 internet company that has gone like all in on IPFS. They've done a lot of stuff with it. So I'm going to be curious to see when more of these like Jamstack providers start to get into this.
Okay.
And that should be
looks like we are deployed. Okay. So I could preview the deploy. And this is gonna give me a link, stuff like that. So this is handling all of the like deploying something out, updating pins, right? So that if people are trying to access resources, they can see like.
Let's go back to your dashboard real quick.
Yes.
And let's just take a look at, go to overview.
Overview. Okay. Oh, and it does look like I've got a link up here. Okay.
So if you see here, we have a name, owner, repo, and then the current IPFS hash. And then don't worry about the Filecoin stuff or anything like that. Let's go to settings.
Okay.
And then there should be a way to name your domain.
Oh, okay. So I instead of it being this round paper 7017, I could call it semantic. Oh, man, this really is Netlify for the IPFS. Okay. So now we've got that. So everything is. So it looks like my site is Some Antics IPFS. on .fleek.co.
Going
Yeah, there it
live.
is. So let's go ahead and put that. Oh, you've already put it in the chat. Thank you. Okay. So, all right. Let's say, I've been working on this, right? And this site, it's very feature complete, but nonetheless, I would like to add more features. I have more content I want to add, right? What is the process now for, I guess, kind of updating my contents or, kind of going like native IPFS? Like, how do I broadcast? Like, I've got a new version of the site for people to use. A
I'm
new
fairly certain at this point, if you make a change and you push it to that Git repo, everything else will be handled for you
Well, so on the Fleek end, right? But not on the
on the Fleek
IPFS.
end.
Okay.
Exactly, which is, and that's why this service is so valuable
Got it.
for you.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'll go ahead and, you know, add in another paragraph tag with another lorem ipsum. Boom. Um, yeah. Boom. Right. So Fleek is already going to take care of this. Cool. Yeah. What kind of stuff is it abstracting away from me for like IPFS stuff?
Yeah, so the IPNS IPFS name, the naming system in particular, I'll drop a link to that in the chat as well. And this is what allows you to not have to constantly update the content hash everything you want to every time you want to change something.
Okay.
And then it's also kind of guaranteeing that there's a gateway that's going to be fast, and that I'm assuming they're also then like caching their content and or caching it and making it so it's like on a CDN. Because when I first did this exercise, like I was trying out different gateways and like different ways of viewing the content. And I ended up at the end with a website with like 5 links to it, through different gateways, and then one flew through Fleek. And there was something called eth.link, which is, if you go to the website, nothing will come up because I'm not sure if this thing even works anymore. It's a Cloudflare service that lets you connect to ENS, because there's also the Ethereum naming system, which lets you have a domain that is like an NFT, and then that domain can point to an IPFS content hash, and you can point a DNS record to that domain. But there was all these like links that I would have to it, and like some of them would load slowly, some of them would not load at all ever, and then Fleek would load fast every single time and would work every single time. So
Nice.
the thing with like the centralized versus decentralized thing, if you try and go 100% decentralization purist, you're going to have stuff just not work very well. And that's because it's going to take 5, 10, maybe 20 years before the system becomes like really super duper reliable in that sense. So if you want to play around this stuff and you want to actually start building websites with it, use something like Fleek. The content is still on IPFS. If you ever want to move off Fleek, you can do that, but like it's going to do so much for you, and it's going to make your life so much easier that you're going to be able to start interacting with this technology much quicker. You'll be able to start shipping stuff much faster. And I think that the more Web3 people can kind of like embrace this like hybrid centralized, decentralized model, the quicker we're going to actually start convincing people that this stuff is useful and usable.
Gotcha. Okay. And you had quickly mentioned like NFTs, and I don't want to make this an NFT stream. Like we've discussed this ahead of time, but just so I can understand the technology, because I had heard that, for instance, like NFTs were effectively like just a link to like basically a hyperlink to something in a database, right? It's this hash, right? Like it's just pointing to the hash in IPFS.
So the NFT itself is an identifier that is globally unique, and then that identifier is on the blockchain. So that, as you say, can point to a database. It can point to just an S3 bucket, but you can also have it point to an IPFS content hash. And so that's where you can feel a little more safe that your NFT is not something that's just going to disappear, because it can't just be taken off of a database. And so this is why it's really important if you are going to get into NFTs, you need to understand, where is this NFT actually live? Does it actually live on a decentralized system, or is it just on someone's computer somewhere? Because that could be really dangerous if you want to pay a bunch of money for something that could just disappear and never be there again. So that's why having an NFT that is actually on IPFS is, when people are thinking about how NFTs work, it only really works the way people think it does if it's on a system like this and not just pointing to a database somewhere.
We have good friend of both of us, Michael Chan, in the chat. putting it very succinctly, which is yeet my data into space. And with that, so we are unfortunately coming up on out of time. So I want to kind of wrap this up with, what do you think web developers, especially those of us like myself who would consider like ourselves like, squarely web 2. I have, I'm not interested in like cryptocurrency, NFT. That's just not my purview. What do you think we should keep our eyes on going forward? Like, how is this developing? What should people be keeping their eyes on in
Yeah.
terms of this kind of work?
Yeah, I would say keep an eye on who are the Web 2 companies. Like, now I don't really like the term Web 2. I use it like a shorthand. Like, I prefer not to create this like us
Or
versus them, or the future than the
yeah.
past kind of narrative. So it's like I don't really like that at all. So I would say look at non-Web 3 companies that are doing this and see kind of how much buy-in we're getting from them. Because as companies like Cloudflare, as companies like maybe Netlify or Vercel start to get into this, that's where it's going to be easier to kind of bridge this gap for people who don't want to have to go through this whole process of learning an entirely new mental model and system. So if you're someone who is just very practical, you're like, I just want to build stuff, I want it to work, then I would say you don't really have to worry about IPFS for a while. If you're someone who, though, are interested in new tech and you like learning new things, you like kind of having yourself stretched, then this thing right now, it's at a point now where it's like stable enough and built out enough and has enough conventions built into it that you can start reliably learning these things and
Mhm.
internalizing these mental models, and those are going to stay the same. The idea of the content hash, the idea of the gateways, the idea of how this whole thing kind of fits together, that's not going to change. So if you're someone who wants to build expertise in something that's going to be long lasting and valuable into the future, I think that being an IPFS expert is something that is going to massively pay off down the line. Now, the question of when that is, I can't tell you. I can't predict the future. All I can say is that there is a direction that the internet is going, and this is going to be a big part of it. I feel pretty dang confident that that is the case. Now, that doesn't mean the old internet is going to go away and the new internet is going to entirely be IPFS. There's going to be some sort of combination of the two, and the two will interact with each other. And at a certain point, to users, there will be no difference. They will not have to worry about these gateways. They'll not have to worry about all this. At a certain point, people will just write links into their address bar and it'll take them to places. And sometimes it'll take it to IPFS and
Mhm.
sometimes it won't. And the users will have no idea. But to me, that is the future I think where we're headed towards.
All right. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for your time. I always learn some really cool stuff from you every time you're on, so I really appreciate your time. Y'all
Thank
go
you.
follow Anthony on the Twitters. Yeah, let's shout out Alex Trost. That means a lot. We super appreciate having you and all of y'all in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. Chat, stick around. We are going to find someone to raid, but also, if you're not already following Some Antics, you should. We've got some exciting streams coming up. One I'm particularly excited about is this Friday with Lindsay Wardell. Back in January, Lindsay came on to teach me the basic Elm syntax, but we weren't able to get very far into making like real things. So Lindsay's coming back on this Friday at 2 p.m. Central. We're going to be building Elm apps. So absolutely follow Some Antics if you want more streams like this and that. Follow us on Twitter. Alex, thank you so much for gifting that sub. That is too kind. Yeah, follow us on Twitter. That way you can keep apprised of all the good streams. And yeah, we will see you all around. Bye, y'all.